Cleveland Browns have won 4 out of their last 5
all
games.
of my bobbleheads are officially throwback. This one's for you.
This is a big one for me. You know?
The day has come, Drew Swallen. The day has come that we can start talking about the NFL draft. Because last weekend was the NFL Combine. We got to see everyone in their shorts and t-shirts, the workout
it's my
warriors.
favorite time of football season.
And not pads, yes.
It is finally time to talk about some NFL draft. So, Drew, this is your day. This is your day that you wanted to go to. What did you think about the Combine?
Oh man, this is glory day. Finally, The Rock has come back to the NFL draft. I am thrilled. I'm someone that is a big fan of the Combine, not necessarily watching it on NFL Network. I don't have to sit there and watch them run the 40 and run the 3-cone drill. I think that's actually kind of boring, but hey, I'm not judging. If you're into that, cool, have fun with it. But I really like being able to objectively measure people in terms of their athleticism, because I know for a fact, this isn't an opinion, I know this to be true, that the Browns under Andrew Berry and before him Sashi Brown, they put a lot of weight into these measurements. The correlation between the SPARK score, the SPARK score, and the Cleveland Browns draft board is extremely high. For those of you listening who might not be familiar with SPARK, SPARK is an acronym. It stands for Speed, Power, Agility, Reaction, and Quickness. SPARQ, SPARK. And it's just an arbitrary sort of scoring system. But it is designed to measure sport-specific athleticism, and within one sport, position-specific athleticism, as is the case with football. And when you run the Combine, when you get everybody participating in the same drills, it becomes very easy to determine the guys with high SPARK score and low SPARK score. The Combine does a really good job of that. This is not what I prefer. I don't prefer to scout people this way, but I know for certain the analytics crew does. I know for certain if you have somebody that has a low SPARK score, the Cleveland Browns are not going to draft him. The Cleveland Browns are not going to select KJ Hill in this draft. Full stop. It's not going to happen because he has a low SPARK score. But there's some things we can do with that, and we can extrapolate who is high on their board. So if we want to look at position by position, I can go briefly into some of that. I'm just going to focus on just the offense for today, so you'll have to come back next week for the defense. A little teaser there for you at the running back position.
The show.
Absolutely, man. At the running back position, not that I expect this to be a selection because I think they have 2 good running backs, but there's not a whole lot behind them, and I think Eric has sort of alluded to this in previous podcasts. Behind Kareem, there's a whole lot of nothing. So there's a chance they could pick one. And there was only 2 prospects in this year's Combine with a SPARK score over 90, which means very high on the spreadsheets draft board. So that's A.J. Dillon from Boston College and Jonathan Taylor. No big surprise there from Wisconsin. I don't expect Jonathan Taylor to be around when the Browns might target running back, but A.J. Dillon is a name to consider. Go ahead and put that into your memory banks, put that into your draft board. You can say you heard it here first. On the wide receiver side, Henry Ruggs ran one of the fastest 40s of all time, so he's going to go in the first round. He's not really a target, but I'll give you 2 more names. Donovan Peoples-Jones, we probably know that name. Should have been an Ohio State recruit, would have been a first-round pick if he had been. Big mistake. He goes someplace different, and he's going to end up going in the 2nd or 3rd round. If he's available in round 3, I think the Browns might pull the trigger there. And the other one is one of my favorite day 3 sleepers is Devin Duvernay from Texas. He scored a 93 on the adjusted SPARK score. So some names to think about there, but those were all the appetizers. Let me give you the main course here for Cleveland Browns, first round draft pick targets, and that is of course going to be, from what we can tell, an offensive tackle. So I'm going to start with some things that might surprise you. Of the top 4, there are 4 top tackles in this draft. Based on every scouting score, every publication, every scout, they will tell you that Tristan Wirfs, Jedrick Wills, Andrew Thomas, and Mekhi Becton. That is your top 4. It will, there's a bunch of different thoughts on who goes one through 4. Kind of like the quarterbacks back in the 2018 draft when we picked Baker. There was all kinds of thoughts on, was Rosen good? Is Darnold good? But in this case, it's with these tackles, it's these top 4. But let me tell you how they're going to shape out on the Cleveland Browns draft board. Mekhi Becton from Louisville had a 100. He is the most impressive offensive tackle the Spark system has ever seen. He's in the 100th percentile. There's never been somebody that scored this highly. He's going to be number 1 on their boards. He almost has to be. So the Browns and Andrew Berry are going to be hoping that he's there. If he's not there, I'm almost certain the next highest person on that draft board is going to be Tristan Wirfs from Iowa. He scored a 97 in adjusted Spark. Those are the 2 names. Those are going to be 1 and 2, maybe 1A, 1B on their draft board. I almost know this to be true. After that, Jedrick Wills scored a 74 and Andrew Thomas a 71. Those are okay scores. They probably don't get them disqualified on the spreadsheet. But there were several other players that scored higher. Matt Pert from UConn, 96. Alex Taylor from South Carolina State, small school prospect, 95. Ezra Cleveland, who's been, very high on some boards of late. He had a 91. He's from Boise State. And Austin Jackson, which I think is a very strong second-round target for this team. He's from USC, and he had an 89. So at this point, the takeaway from all this math is that I believe, and I genuinely believe this to be true, that if Mekhi Becton and Tristan Wirfs are off the board by 10, that I'd be looking for the spreadsheet to consider a trade down or potentially a different position. That's where I'm at right now. If you want to follow some of this nerd stuff, you can also take a look at the RAS score. That's RAS. This is a different proprietary metric, a little different than Spark. It doesn't have quite as high of a correlation to the Cleveland Browns draft board, but it's the one that I prefer. And you can follow that by my guy MathBomb, @MathBomb on Twitter. That's Math, B-O-M-B. Excellent follow for any nerd scouts that want to put some numbers to the athleticism scores that they see. He does an excellent job. He'd appreciate the shout-out.
So maybe I'll nerd out on you, or maybe I'll go old school scout on you. So speed.
Go hit me with it, man.
So speed, where are they getting that from? Is that from the 40?
It's from the weight-adjusted 40. So they look at your mass and they put that into, that includes height and weight, right? It's not just it's mass, and they put that against your 40 times. For the offensive tackles, for the tackles they give a much higher grade, a much higher part of the score to the 10-yard splits. Versus the wide receivers and cornerbacks, where it's more the overall 40. But that's what they look at. They look at the size of the player and the 40. Like Tristan Wirfs is objectively faster than Mekhi Becton. You can look at the numbers on that, the 10-yard splits, the 40-yard splits. But because Becton weighs like 35 more pounds, he's massive, and he's fast, and he's quick. That's why he ranks so highly on the Spark score. But
this is why the Spark score fails. I watched, the first session that we had the tight ends running the 40. I'm not going to get the last name here. I think it was Albert O. He was the fastest tight end that they displayed in the combine on day one. Had a great 40 time. Next drill up, you run through, you catch all the balls coming from 2 different directions. You run down the line. And you could see that he didn't have speed while he was trying to catch a ball. He could not walk and chew gum at the same time.
Who's
That speed does not matter. Eric, I'm going to go to you here.
Yeah.
On the field, we cannot forget that
Right.
on the field, in-game speed is what matters. What did you
I'm
take
just
away
telling
from
you
the
what they
combine?
care about.
who's that tight end from the North Carolina that went to the Colt? Who I forget who drafted him,
Ebron?
but he went to the Colts after the fact. Who's
It was Eric Ebron.
Eric Ebron.
I only know
He
Dallas
was-
Clark.
Yeah, he ran a great 40.
Iowa.
That's about all you can say for him. I appreciate Drew notifying us of other nerddom because I'm trying to get away from that because I heard a lot of nerddom this last 5 minutes of our podcast. Yeah, I mean, I definitely see what you're saying. Wirfs with the 4.85, Becton with the 5.10, 40. Obviously, you had talked about Becton being 364, Wirfs being 320, so he's got over 40 pounds on him. I mean, but looking at I refusing to watch just highlights of guys because that only shows the good plays, not the bad plays. I've seen cut-ups of actual games, and I've watched every single offensive play. And, I'm trying to decipher who's what and what I can see. And I do like what Tristan Wirfs has done on tape as far as when he was playing Iowa State. He would play one series of left tackle, the next series of right tackle, the next series of left tackle. So I think he can obviously juggle both ways. He's a little bit shorter, but 6'5", if you want to use that in shorter terms. But, I mean, I think he'd be a tremendous player for the Browns. Becton's, yes, he has the tangibles, the 6'7", the 364. He ran a 5'10". I watched his tape, and he was able to get out on the edge a couple of times. Obviously, you can do that if you run a 5.10 as an offensive lineman, but obviously, not to knock a whole conference, but I'm going to knock a whole conference, is that Louisville played one tough team all year, and they got destroyed by Clemson. So I don't know what he's doing against his competition. He looked fine. Between the two, I'd probably take Wirfs. Looking at Wills, he was the right tackle, obviously, for Alabama. Alabama's historically had pumped out a lot of good guys offensively, whether it's been a line or receivers, running backs. The only thing that really gives me pause is that he was the right tackle. So everybody said, "Oh, but it was the quarterback's blind side." It immediately reminds me of Kevin Schaefer when the Browns picked him because he was Michael Vick's blindside protector for the Atlanta Falcons. Didn't really turn out well. Hopefully, Jedrick Wills has a better NFL career than Kevin Schaefer. But
Dude, that is a hell of a reference, man. That is, I did not know where you were going with that.
But I saw him a little bit. He seemed like he wasn't as athletic as the other two I just mentioned. Obviously, he's probably not as fast, but strength is also very important. So I would definitely give him an opening. And when I looked at Austin Jackson, surprisingly, I got highlights of the former Indians outfielder a couple years ago, which made some nice catches. Once I got to the USC offensive lineman, I was actually kind of surprised. He was able to get out and move as well, and I know that's a big thing with the zone scheme. Yeah, he could be a late first round. He could be a second rounder. I kind of would be surprised if they were to go with him. They would probably have to trade back. That would be the only scenario, as Drew had mentioned, if Wirfs and Becton are off the board and maybe Simmons is off the board, they go back. Maybe they could pick him up in the late first, but preferably I'd rather just get your guy at 10. So, all that considered, who would I want that's not an offensive lineman? You got to go with Simmons. I really don't know how well that's going to happen. He's the guy that the Steelers took last year in the first round.
Devin Bush.
Yeah, Devin Bush. He's kind of like the Devin Bush of this year. Kind of can do it all. Kind of can go in different positions. I would definitely root for that one. Another couple things that I'm rooting for is the quarterbacks, multiple quarterbacks to go in the top 10, whether that's Justin Herbert, Jordan Love, in addition to Tua and Joe Burrow, obviously. I don't know how many will. Two definitely will be in the top 10. I prefer 4, but that would just give us 2 more options for non-quarterbacks in the top 10. And the other thing that I will say is, right now is these wide receiver crops. There's a lot of good, talented guys out there, and it's just crazy that so many mock drafts and so many people are saying these athletic, talented guys that offenses need to have, to make plays basically are going to be going 17, 18, 19 and beyond. CeeDee Lamb, T. Higgins, Jerry Jeudy are just a couple to name it. I mean, I could be willing, I could be hopeful that maybe one of them will get, up in the top 10. No mock drafts will have them, but nobody had Cleveland, whatever his name was from Clemson, Cleveland Farrell last year. Nobody had him in the top 10, and the Oakland Raiders took him. So, things are moving right now. I'm starting to get a lot more excited. Can only get so excited about an offensive lineman. We haven't had a good one drafted in the first round since 2007. I guess Mitchell Schwartz, he had his moments with us. He had a lot more.
He was great. He was a second-round pick, but he was great.
Yeah, there you go. That was my caveat, first round. So we don't count Cameron Irving. So, the spark scores are important. I definitely will agree with Drew in that Andrew Berry will say that the spark scores are important, but there are so many other things. You got to see them. I'm not an all football guy. Got to look at only the tape. You got to combine the two. If you have all spark scores, you could just be good at testing. You can only try and work hard, be a Mike Mamula or a couple of these guys that are just testing well. It doesn't mean you're a good football player.
Yeah, I would say Andrew Berry will deny vehemently that spark score matters. He will claim that he has never even heard of it, doesn't know the metric at all. But it is extremely important for, if you look at the people Sashi Brown picked, you look at the people, when Andrew Berry went to Philadelphia under Howie Roseman, Andre Dillard, their left tackle, he was the first tackle taken. That was a bad tackle class, but he was a pretty good player, and he led the offensive lineman in spark score. There's a reason that was the guy that he picked. There's a reason that they end up with guys like David Njoku and Jabril Peppers, people that have size, strength, speed type of athletes. I'm not necessarily knocking it. I'm just letting all of our believers know that this is a metric that you ought to be familiar with, because it is something that is very highly correlated to who the Browns pick in these drafts.
Yeah, I think we can all agree here that 4 quarterbacks in the top 10 would be pretty awesome for us.
That'd be great.
Give us a lot more options. And that's been the talk, at least in the media, that the quarterback, Jordan Love, moving up to go up with those top 3 quarterbacks. So that is something that we will be rooting for. It seems like the probability of getting an offensive lineman is pretty high, and that would be the smart pick for the Browns. But it's going to be a lot of pressure on Andrew Berry with the moves that he's made recently. It seems like we're only subtracting players, and the big player that we've subtracted is Joe Schobert. It sounds like he's not going to be re-signed by the Browns. Nothing official yet. I don't think he hasn't signed with a new team yet. And that's a bummer. I think he was a very stable piece of the defense, and it makes me really question what Barry is doing, even though I was very high on him coming back. He's very intelligent. Drew, it seems like you might be sold. Are you still on the Barry bandwagon here?
So Andrew Berry was my second pick. I wanted George Patton as the GM. And my concern with Andrew Berry is the exact same thing we're seeing here. This is exactly the same mistakes this regime made in 2016 when they decided that the 3-13 Cleveland Browns had too much talent, and Mitchell Schwartz and Tayshaun Gibson and Travis Benjamin and who's the guy?
Jordan Cameron.
Jordan Cameron. All these guys that are talented players, all these guys gone. They decide that they're not worth re-signing. That the spreadsheet says they want too much money, and then they go out and they cut good players too, like Andrew Hawkins and Taylor Gabriel, because they spend 6 draft picks on the position, right? I'm not even to that point. I'm just focused on the free agency part. They've already cut a decent backup cornerback in TJ Carey. It's fine that he probably was going to make too much money. I actually don't have a huge issue with that. You can find depth in the draft, but that's where you start. You start by making a hole at your primary boundary corner backup spot on two guys that are always hurt. There's without question, Denzel Ward and Greedy Williams are not going to start 32 combined games next season. It's not going to happen. So you need a guy like TJ Carey who can come in and play that boundary corner, and you don't have him now. Now that's one hole. Now you go out and you say you're not going to re-sign Joe Schobert. So you're essentially saying that this guy will be a free agent at the start of the league year on March 16th. That's a massive hole at middle linebacker that you didn't need. You didn't need to do that. This team is $65 million under the salary cap. They could easily afford to give Joe Schobert a $10 million per year cap hit. There's no question in my mind that you could bring him back. He is a good player, one of the best coverage linebackers in the league, and he's better against the run than he is given credit for. That is a big mistake. You compound that from the reading between the lines, cryptic tweets that have come out that you look at what Christian Kirksey's cap hit is, $9.5 million for an off-ball outside linebacker. And from what it looks like, he's not coming back either. Now you have two holes you have to fill. Sure, Mac Wilson probably takes one of those, but who's your backup there, right? So you've created these holes in this defense that needed an infusion of talent anyway. And this has always been my issue with this analytics team. They put these guys into this spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet spits out this formula that says that this guy's overpaid. And they just cut him. This is the same thing they did with Joe Hayden. This is the same thing they did with Mitchell Schwartz, not re-signing him. You end up cutting good players and not re-signing good players despite having, an ocean of salary cap space. And this has always been my contention with this analytics-based front office. It was my issue with Sashi. It's my issue with Andrew Berry. Andrew Berry's a more talented GM. I'm still high on him. I still like him as a GM. I think they're going to do some good things with innovative trades and with some of the analytics stuff. I'm an analytics fan, obviously. I do not understand the spreadsheet that they put this number into to generate these decisions. And my last point on this is a Mary Kay Cabot article came out about a week ago that the spreadsheet thinks Olivier Vernon's cap hit is too high. It's at $15.5 million. He's on this. This is the last year of his deal. So you can't restructure that. He has zero guaranteed money, and he's in the last year of his contract. You don't restructure that. There's nothing to restructure. The only thing you can do is try to add like a year or two onto the deal, and then turn that 15.5 number into a signing bonus, and maybe spread out the cap hit. But he has to agree to that, and if I'm him, I would have a hard time with that. And I don't think there's any way that this spreadsheet allows Andrew Berry to say my DE2, my number 2 edge rusher, is worth $15.5 million of my salary cap. That is almost 10%. That's not quite 10. It's Sonia can hit you with the math here on this, but it's probably 8. It's 8% of your salary cap. They're not going to, the spreadsheet's not going to go for that. So unless there's some sort of deal reworked, you're looking at another hole with defensive end, and this is a really big deal. We saw how bad that defense got when Miles was suspended. Part of those games, Olivier Vernon was hurt. But if you don't have that guy, you get Miles double teamed the whole game. He runs out of gas, and you've got nobody else to pressure the quarterback. So I have some real issues with analytics front offices when it comes to free agency. I don't think they ever do a good job with it. They're never aggressive because the spreadsheet tells them to not be aggressive, and it just drives me crazy. And we'll see if this year's different. We'll see if they go out and sign Anthony Harris. There's been some talk about that, but I will believe that when I see it. This is a front office that has never been big on free agent signings, and the ones they have done, sure, I'm going back to the Sashi Brown era, but you get into the Kenny Britts of the world, the Sammy Coateses of the world, where you give all this money to these guys that are just terrible. So I am very much a show me when it comes to free agency with this group. I do not trust them at all.
Yeah, the time to make a splash in free agency is right now. The Browns fans'
just
patience.
run it back,
There's no more patience. This cap space it's time to realize or actualize this cap space. We need to push a team into the playoffs this season. Sign the players who are going to get us into the playoffs this season. I know
Give
John
me that
Dorsey.
2019 roster, run that whole thing back. Give me Demarius Randall, give me Olivier Vernon, give me Joe Schobert, give me Chris Kirksey. Run that whole thing back with an adult, with a competent head coach and a competent coaching staff, and I am confident that team goes at worst 10-6. But if you're going to get rid of all these good players and try to replace them with rookies, what are we doing? We're just spinning our wheels.
I know the team didn't have discipline last year, but at least John Dorsey added pieces to the nucleus, and that's what he helped build. Yes, the team did not win, but we have pieces moving forward, and that's something that we haven't had in a long time. We actually have some momentum. We have some playmakers on this team. We have to keep pushing. Eric, do you believe that Barry is going to push this free agency period?
No, I'm probably in the same boat as Drew. And what really makes it frustrating is kind of how you guys were talking about is, how some of these guys were acting childish and they needed an adult in the room. I mean, Joe Schobert is like an example of an adult. Like you're not going to see him on the police blotter. You're not going to hear him speak out and say, I want more money, this and that. I mean, he's the guy you need in the locker room. Okay, you pay him a couple extra $1 million. That's fine. That's well worth it. I mean, if you get rid of Kirksey as a result, that's a bummer. But, I mean, you can't let both guys walk. That you're opening holes where you're going to have Taki and Mac Wilson be the two guys and the linebackers, and they might have a huge bump from year one to year two. But I don't want to rely on those two guys and combine that with either rookies or two, guys who've been released or unwanted free agents from other teams. And then the Higgins thing, I'm hearing both sides of the coin. He might come back, he might not come back. I mean, he was not in favor with the last group, but I mean, that's another guy. If you can get him on the cheap, it makes sense. I don't want to put another third or fourth round guy in, insert him immediately, and be the next Travis Wilson or be some other terrible mid-round draft pick for the Browns that has Cindric Steptoe that you force them in there and they have no clue what they're doing. So, yes, I mean, long and short of it is this team needs veterans. They have plenty of them on the team as they are. They have plenty of cap space too, so they can allocate that cap space to their own veterans. The only other options, if they want to get rid of this, is either sign veterans who aren't necessarily as productive for cheaper, which will not help the team out because they are not as good unless they, have magically a huge career or a huge year for 1 year. Or you go with rookies who are, inconsistent or, unlikely unless they're, certain positions, running backs, sometimes linebacker, sometimes defensive rush ends, but most positions aren't acclimated year one of that rookie deal to be ready to go. So if anything, you will be hurting your team letting these guys go. Going back to what we're saying, it's a detriment. We have this cap space. You hear this new CBA, and in the cap space will be going up in future years. When I had discussed this with Ryan, I'm really hoping this is the reason, is that this whole CBA not being signed is the reason why some of these deals are still in flux. Not necessarily with the Browns. I'm sure there are with other teams, but I think the Schobert thing is unfortunately kind of done. But maybe the Kirksey, Higgins, and some other guys, maybe that's what's holding up. That's what I'm holding out hope for because, that after the 2015 season, seeing all those guys leave, yeah, they had a bad season, but once I saw all those guys leave, I knew 2016 was going to be in for a rough start. And we had enough talent on this team as it was, and I don't want to go into an off season where we're losing all this talent or losing a good portion of our talent, and it's going to be an uphill climb going forward.
What's the deal? Like, you can cut NFL players whenever you want. I don't want to see a dime left over on this salary cap.
Right.
Maximize the cap. Sign as many players as possible. What does it mean?
Just a question. I don't know this answer.
Hang on.
Have the Browns? I think 2002 was that the last time they were over the cap after the 2002 season when they had to cut the Earl brothers, Earl Holmes and Earl Little.
Yes.
That's a good question.
Yes, that was the last time they were in
1 year. They make the
salary cap
playoffs
prison.
1 year. That was the only time. Get me back to that point, please. Give me back to that point.
So let me just of the 65 million, 35 of it is what we call rollover space, right? It means that the Browns actually, to get to the 200 million level, they have 35 million that they can spend right now, and that would take them to the same cap everybody else has of 200 million. And they have this other rollover money, that they want to spend, theoretically extending guys like Myles Garrett and when it comes time to it, Baker Mayfield. But still,
Good, spend it.
You can eat into some of that, right? Like, you have guys like Olivier Vernon, coming off, Sheldon Richardson coming off contract before you have to make those moves, right? So, maybe not all 65 million of it, but how about we end up with only 20 million in salary cap space for the first time in years? I am over this whole penny pinching, try to get to 80 million cap space, front office. I am past that, and I am sick and tired of being told you have to get worse before you get better.
Yeah, take a page out of Dan Gilbert's playbook. Put the money where your mouth is.
Right.
Sign some players. Get this team into the playoffs this season. All right.
Right.
Let's talk about another set of playoffs that are going to be coming up here. Let's talk some XFL and our picks for the weekend.
The NFL draft and the XFL, man. This is you might as well just call this the Drew Swallen podcast. This is my two favorite topics in the world.
Man, baseball's got to step up here if we're going to start talking about the Indians.
Yep.
But the time will come here. The weather's going to get a little bit nicer. We'll talk some Indians here soon. But XFL, how have you guys been catching up? And what do you think about this upcoming weekend? Drew, the Drew Swallen podcast this week. Let's hear your picks and if you've been keeping up with the XFL.
Absolutely, man. We watch every week almost. I missed week 3. We went up to visit some family in the north part of the state here, but I've watched 3 out of the 4 weeks, and what I can tell you is there are maybe 3 tiers of teams. There's the top tier, which consists of 2 teams right now, and it might only be one. It's Houston and potentially the St. Louis Battlehawks. Those are the only 2 teams that you can look at and say, these teams are both well coached and they have decent quarterback play, and those are the teams that I think are really fun to watch. Those are the teams that I'm really enjoying watching and that I really try to tune into. In that middle tier, you get into to Ryan to your DC Defenders, where they started out great and I think they have a lot of parts, but they have been really unable, really inconsistent. Can't piece this thing together. I have no idea what team is going to show up, from week to week. And I'll put the Dallas Renegades in that tier as well. This is a team that played Houston tough. They have a decent quarterback in Landry Jones. They've got some pieces, but I think they're they're certainly a step behind those other teams. And then you get into really the rest of the league. Los Angeles, Tampa Bay, Seattle, New York. All those teams are fairly interchangeable. The one that I like the best out of that crew, out of that group of four, is Tampa Bay. And that's actually going to be my pick of the week. I'm going to give you an upset special this week. Okay. I'm going to take Tampa Bay plus 1.5 at Los Angeles. I think they win this game outright, but why not? I'll take the 1.5 hook there. Crazy things happen in the XFL with the 3-point conversions and stuff. So that's my pick of the week. I'm going Tampa Bay plus 1.5. Always dicey picking a fairly bad team against another bad team. You have no idea what's going to happen in that game, which is one of the reasons it's fun to watch. So that's going to be my pick. Tampa Bay plus 1.5. I don't love it. This is definitely a one-unit play, if anything.
All right, Eric, who you got this weekend?
Well, let me just say, whatever teams I've been watching have been my good luck charm. I watched the DC Defenders exclusively the first 2 weeks. Then they got kicked to the second game on Sunday, put the kids to bed, going to bed myself, kind of missed those. They've been on a 2-game losing streak. I started picking up on the St. Louis Battlehawks, seeing them, picking up on is it the Edward Jones Dome now? I don't know what it's called now, but their fans are rallying around them.
Excellent fans in St. Louis. Yep.
So ironically, that's the game I have. I don't know which way I'm gonna go, but I guess I'm gonna take the hot hand, and I'm gonna take the St. Louis Battlehawks laying 3.5 over the DC Defenders as my lock of the week. But it's a good product. I like it a lot more than the AAF, but I hope they keep it up and hope they keep us entertained. We've already discussed this before. Some of the rule changes have really helped, and the actual play is a lot better than the AAF, where guys were missing wide receivers open by 10, 15 yards. So. I can't wait to watch that game this weekend, and maybe I'll catch another one. It's probably not the late one at 9 o'clock on a Sunday night, but the other ones, yeah, sure. Let's go.
Yeah, it's a difficult situation. I love watching Cardell play with the DC Defenders. Mm-hmm. I feel like that's much of my team. I think the XFL will be back next year. I think that's a positive thing. Yeah. And I hope they continue to build connections with their hometown teams, and they hopefully will build a connection in Canton next year.
So Canton Bulldogs. There's a professional team. Inherit all that history. Claim it's the next season of the Canton Bulldogs, where they last played in 1905, and bring them back. 105 years later, whatever it is. This is something I will scream from the rafters. Bring the XFL to Canton, Ohio.
And maybe we'll have to play inside at the home of the Cleveland Crunch or something. But
no, man, put him out at the Hall of Fame game, man. Right, the Hall of Fame Stadium.
There's Tom Benson now. It used to be Fawcett Stadium. Now it's the Tom Benson Stadium.
Yeah,
I would love it.
They would have more fans there than in LA.
It seems like they've got a weather thing going on. They want to have nice weather, but I don't know.
Put them in a blizzard, man. Everybody watch that.
The Canton Crazies would be out there for 5 of those games. I'm sure they could pull it. But my pick of the weekend, I'm going to go Seattle, the big underdog. I think it's minus 12.5, 13.5. Yep. Going with the Dragons against the Renegades, even though the Renegades undefeated, looking really good. I'm going to go with Seattle. I think it's too many points. Seattle has that hometown connection. I think they're doing it for Seattle. So
it's the
Roughnecks. Did I mess that up?
That are undefeated. Yeah.
Yeah, they're plus 13, whatever.
Yes.
But we got you.
They're getting. Seattle's getting.
Those novice gamblers will be very confused, but us experts, we got it. We're good.
All right. Well, thank you guys. We'll keep our eye on Andrew Barry. Please don't let us down, and please sign some players. We'll be watching. We'll be talking about it next week. We'll talk some more draft. I guess Drew says we need to talk about the defense next week. We'll do it. And we'll talk to you guys next week.
All right.
Talking about.
Talk to you later.